While Tesla's competition focuses on manufacturing EVs and figuring out how to do it at scale, Tesla is on to the next level, building autonomous vehicles, preparing for a future where the hardware revenue from EVs pales in comparison to the software revenue from EVs, and the world is a safer place to boot. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I want to spend today talking about a research note published by Morgan Stanley on October 6th, which is really pretty remarkable because I believe it's really the first Wall Street firm that's setting out a reasonable case for why Tesla's autonomous software and hardware is going to be such a big deal. But first, in regards to yesterday's video about Elon Musk and space, and if you haven't caught that one, you should definitely check it out. It's really amazing stuff. Coincidentally, right after I filmed that video and I talked about my senior thesis, I actually found it. It was sitting over there, kind of piled up. You remember I'm, in my flood room right now because we're still waiting for people to come fix my original office. But I found this just like sitting on the floor. It's possible sources of excess noise in timing data from millisecond pulsar, 1937 plus 21, April 17th, 1987. So pretty cool, 35 years ago. But what I really wanted to show here was I have a quote from Hermann Hesse from Steppenwolf at the beginning of this physics paper. So anyway, I was always kind of a geek about that sort of stuff. I love to combine, English and the arts and humanities with more hardcore science and everything. So anyway, pretty cool, little trip down memory lane. I looked back through it again and I was like, oh, very interesting. And one really cool thing is that I believe 1937 plus 21 is one of the many millisecond pulsars that was recently used to provide evidence for the gravitational background radiation from the Big Bang. So that's actually really cool that little millisecond pulsar out there in the universe is one of the myriad ones that was used to provide evidence for this really, really fascinating stuff. If anybody's interested, I could actually do an episode on that. It's totally outside of the general gist of this channel, but maybe I could do it for Patreon subscribers or folks on X or something because they seem to have a little bit wider range. Anyway, if you're interested, let me know. All right, so on to Sawyer Merritt's post here. News: Morgan Stanley's Adam Jonas, who is amazing by the way, has released a new Tesla note in defense of robotaxis. And I like this quote, which we'll see in the actual article, but the facts and events do change and so too must an analyst's views. While many obstacles remain, we believe the robotaxi will ultimately have its moment. So while that's a bit of an understatement, you've got to realize that these folks are Wall Street analysts and they don't usually get too effusive about things. All right, so let's turn to the research note itself. It's 3 pages plus 1 page of just stuff like disclaimers and things like that. So anyway, you can freeze frame that frame right there and look at that if you're interested. But what I, of course, am mostly interested in is the first 3 pages. So you can see they've upped their price target to $400 based on this, which is really interesting. And they have the stock rating as overweight. You can take Morgan Stanley for what you want. Remember, do your own research. I am not a stock analyst by any means whatsoever, so don't listen to anything I say about this. I'm just interested in the technology and so forth. If you want to look at their stuff and do a deep dive, then you can use them as a guide to whether to buy Tesla or not. All right, so let's start this article. Quote, autonomous cars are no longer just the realm of science fiction. They are real and will be on roads sooner than you think, end quote. Everybody was very optimistic 10 years ago. You can see this. These were 2 opening sentences of our autonomous cars blue paper written nearly 10 years ago with my research partner, Ravi Shankar. In that report, we had predicted that the first autonomous cars would be on the road in commercial operation at limited scale before the end of the decade. Not too far off because I believe Cruise and Waymo started operations officially in 2021-ish. I can't remember the exact time when the first official driverless car was on the road, but it was either 2021 or 2022. So, they missed by a couple of years, but that's not so bad. Of course, on the more broad-based technological front, everyone was too optimistic. We're still not quite there yet, but we actually are getting really close now. By the end of this decade, the 2020s, we will be looking at autonomous cars on the road at scale, like big scale, millions of vehicles. In years subsequent to our initial AV report, it became clearer to the stock market that the journey to autonomous cars would be more complicated, a delayed and non-linear adoption rate. I kind of like that. Big old S-curve. You think you're advancing quickly and it's very linear and then it rolls off. And Tesla has been victim to this many times, of course. They've thought they were going to reach a real maximum and they reached a local maximum and had to go back and retool and do things that were different. And obviously, version 10 of the software was different than version 9. Version 11 is different than version 10. Version 12 will be a major step change and hopefully will be the final major step change change needed because, of course, that is a very, very different architecture. And if it works as advertised, and it looks like it does with Elon Musk's recent beta drive, and if you haven't seen my video on that, you should definitely check that out as well. Anyway, we're getting there, and hopefully the local maximum in the next instance with version 12 will be substantially better than a human driver, and then robotaxis will be allowed to be on the road at scale. More on that in a minute, but first, if you're like me and you love to learn, then CuriosityStream is for you. With a focus on science, history, and technology, CuriosityStream makes it easy and entertaining to expand your knowledge of all kinds of topics. CuriosityStream has thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles, including award-winning original content you can't find anywhere else. CuriosityStream is available on many platforms like computers, phones, game systems, and even smart TVs, so you can learn and be entertained just about anywhere. It's also constantly updated with awesome, timely content, so you can stay up to date on the latest topics. Right now, I'm watching Hack the Moon, a great documentary about technology and the history of the Apollo space missions, two of my favorite topics together in one. I also love iHuman, about the rise of intelligent machines and robots, and Breakthrough, a science series about various topics like the search for life on Jupiter's moons and the quest for fusion power. With amazing plans starting at under $5 a month, you can get great original content on a budget that fits your needs. Go to curiositystream.com/drno or scan the QR code on the screen for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and nonfiction series. And just for you, use the promo code DrNo and you will save 25% off. Thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to click the link in the description to stay curious, and now let's get back to it. Continuing on here, however, we remind investors that autonomous cars are a reality. Right now they are. I personally have taken rides in vehicles on public roads in a crowded city with no driver behind the wheel. I have clients who say they use Cruise and Waymo vehicles for commuting around San Francisco on a regular basis. So of course, Cruise and Waymo are kind of the sharp point of the spear here. They do not have that many vehicles like Tesla does on the road, but they have managed to get regulatory approval in San Francisco and that area to drive their robotaxis autonomously with nobody in the car. And that's a pretty cool thing that they've got that going already. And that should really grease the wheels for Tesla if and when they get to the point where they want to actually introduce this in a driverless fashion instead of, currently the version is you have to pay attention. It's in beta. You have to be ready to take over at any second. You're legally responsible for the car if anything happens to it, all of that kind of stuff. But of course, with the flip of a switch, which basically is just no longer having that disclaimer, Tesla could allow drivers to do that. I don't think the cars are quite there yet, but in a place like San Francisco, they're really, really close. Are driverless cars ubiquitous? Far from it. We estimate the combined population of cars in operation in the US without drivers in the seat, in other words, Waymo, Cruise, etc., not including Tesla, account for 0.0004% of all cars on the road, or in another way, there are approximately 250,000 human drivers for every one driverless car on the road in the US. So that is not what I would call at scale yet, which is why I said we're not looking at these scale things. And of course, it also excludes Tesla because Tesla is not a fully autonomous vehicle at this point. If they do become that, we're looking at somewhere around 1 million Teslas on US roads. And if they could, again, with the flip of a switch, be made autonomous, you're suddenly going to be at scale very, very rapidly. With all of that as prelude, let's talk about what's really going on right now. But let's go back to what's changing. Specifically, the underlying technology is constantly improving. AI and compute and early commercial efforts are allowing the regulatory environment an opportunity to evolve and, quote, curate. Very interesting term. So certainly compute is advancing. We've got the new NVIDIA H100s, everything's coming online. Compute clusters are getting bigger, more powerful. We've also got Tesla's Dojo that's coming online and also helping Tesla with that specifically. But we also have changes to the architecture of the AI. We're getting more and more, at least with Tesla, to an end-to-end neural network-based control, photons in, controls out, all neural networks in between, that kind of a thing. So the architecture is changing too, and actually becoming somewhat simpler than it was before. And the combination of increasing compute and simpler, more effective neural network architecture means that we are getting ever closer to these cars being better than humans on the road. Following the publication of our work on Tesla's AI/supercomputing efforts and Dojo Primer, we have had a more ample and recent opportunity to gauge investor sentiment on the autonomous car theme, most of which just skews skeptical. Autonomous cars seem to grab more headlines these days for when things go wrong. You're not likely to read a news article about a safe and uneventful commute in a robotaxi or under the command of the latest version of Tesla FSD. So that's mostly public sentiment, which I don't care about particularly. The only thing that really matters is that it could put pressure on regulators to slow things down and not allow robotaxis to happen as quickly as they otherwise could. But otherwise, public sentiment is really kind of unimportant to this stuff because people don't really understand what it is that they're looking at until they get a chance to actually utilize it. Then Adam Jonas goes off on a bit of a tangent about September 13th, 1899, which may be the first traffic fatality in at least New York. I'm not sure about the United States. It's a really interesting historical tangent. I'll let you freeze frame if you're interested here. He actually talks about this and how public sentiment was, cars are dangerous, cars are going to kill people. And yet, of course, 123, 124 years later, we have a lot of cars on the road and very few horses on the road. The important point here, of course, is that there were 42,795 traffic-related fatalities in the United States alone in 2022, and I believe more like 1 million globally. So that is a lot of people that are killed in traffic accidents. And of course, a huge number of other people, way more, like 10 times more, I think, are injured severely in traffic accidents. So there's first of all, amazing to cars that with the amount of miles that are being driven and human drivers being as poor as we are driving, that we actually see that few fatalities and that few serious injuries. That's kudos to modern cars being very, very safe. But they could be safer. Every one of those fatalities or serious injuries, if that was removed from the pie, you've got a much happier world in that case. People, individually are not injured by this. And I mean that emotionally as well as physically for those around people who get caught in traffic accidents, but also just globally, we have fewer people being killed, fewer disruptions, less payouts from insurance companies and things like that. There's a lot of positive benefits to reducing that number. So continuing on, why do we extend this olive branch to the robot-powered car? As we continue to engage with AI experts within Morgan Stanley Research Department and amongst our client and corporate network, we can't help but feel a gradual demystification of what an autonomous car has to do and what technologies are required to add more nines to the right of the decimal place as we move the comparison of safety levels from human driver benchmarking to something approaching commercial aircraft safety levels. And of course, if you don't know, your drive to the airport, if you're going to fly someplace, at least within the United States, Europe, and many other countries, you are much more likely to die in an automobile accident on the way to the airport than you are to be killed in an airliner accident. And I actually think it's really cool that Adam Jonas brings this up. This is something that we should eventually be striving for, is that automobiles are as safe as commercial aircraft, not as safe as human drivers. So the first hurdle, of course, is to get to be as good as the average human driver, then as good as the really, really good human driver, then better than the human driver, then 2x better than the human driver, 10x better than the human driver, probably something like 100 to 1,000x better than the best human driver before we'll be looking at commercial airline levels of safety. But that is a really good goal. If we can get to that kind of thing where only a person or two are killed in the United States per year when autonomous vehicles are driving, that is not only a massive savings in lives, but it's also just something that can make you feel more comfortable on the road. You'll be like, oh, goodness gracious, can't believe the old days where they let people drive around. They were so dangerous. Then we get to a paragraph where I have to give a little bit of pushback here. Admittedly, I was pretty surprised when Morgan Stanley North American Semis analyst Joe Moore explained to me that training a vision-based neural network for autonomous driving may be, quote, 1 billion times less complex than training a large language model, LLM. So I think what Joe is talking about here is he's saying it's going to have fewer weights inside of the neural network architecture. GPT-4 might be on the order of 500 billion parameters, something like that. So we could be looking at a neural network architecture that is substantially smaller than that. 500 billion parameters is huge. Wouldn't really fit on your vehicle very well, right? So you, by force of having to run it on a mobile computer, you're going to have to make it smaller than that. But 1 billion times less complex is over the top. I mean, that goes from 500 billion parameters to 500 parameters. And 500 parameters is, you can't even do good image classification with 500 parameters. So, we're looking at something that I think that's an overstatement. That must have been hyperbole in that case. But you could be looking at 100 or 1,000 times smaller, or even maybe 10,000 or 100,000 times smaller than that. So, kind of a squishing of things. Again, primarily because it's got to fit on a mobile platform and it's got to run in real time. So it has to be really, really small. But I think a billion times is a bit of an overstatement there. And of course, we have tiny large language models now, like Llama, which is like 7 billion parameters. So that can fit on not just my desktop computer, but can also fit on my laptop and run pretty efficiently. So it's a bit of an overstatement to say that it will be a billion times less than a large language model, because many large language models now are being shrunk back down again. So they kind of blew up, and then people figured out what was necessary to make them work right, including well-curated data, and they're starting to shrink again. So I predict that we will see, some of these high-end, really, really advanced versions that will continue to be fairly large in terms of parameter space, but that we were also going to see models trained on those models and fine-tuned from them and quantized from them and all that kind of stuff that will reduce as well. So we will see kind of a bifurcation of large language models into small large language models and big large language models. And of course, full self-driving, autonomous driving sort of models are going to be in that small large language model category, not hundreds of billions or trillions of parameters. Continuing on, and yes, there are important differences with respect to measuring safety between an accident on the road and an incorrect word choice on a college entrance exam. By the way, who is doing that? Cheating people. But when another industry expert explained to me what skills it really takes to be a super safe driver, it started to click. And by the way, I like it started to click, it's like mentally the light bulb goes off. There are essentially 3 basic things that are generally accepted as required in some quantity to be a safe driver. And here we're talking about human beings, not just neural networks, but anything that's going to drive has to have vision, has to be able to see around it. So can a computer with 7 HD cameras see better than a human? Well, it probably can. Attention span. Can a computer pay attention better than a human? In some ways, yes. It's not going to get drunk. It's not going to get tired. It's not going to start trying to read text messages or look in the back seat to look at the kids. That kind of a thing, definitely a computer has a big advantage to a human over that. But as I've discussed many times, one of the problems with this computer vision thing is its ability to remember things a long time ago. And what I mean by that is more than about 20 seconds or so. It has a hard time remembering things that are that far back and for projecting out what's going to happen into the future. It's really good at the right now. The closer we are to like the current moment in time, the better the full self-driving is. But planning out for the future, planning out for the past, those two things, it gets fuzzier and fuzzier. So attention span is definitely something that still needs to be worked on. But once we get that sort of basic thing down, and again, Tesla is getting better and better with that. Once we get that basic thing down, computers are not going to get tired or distracted. So they will definitely have an advantage over humans at that point. And then number 3 has always been in the computer camp, and that is reaction time. In other words, can a computer react faster to a given situation than a human? Yes. A computer will react in milliseconds, whereas a human might take, full fractions of a second, 400 or 500 milliseconds, 1,000 milliseconds, or something like that. And if they're distracted, it could be multiple seconds before humans react. So it has a big advantage in terms of reaction time. So 1 and 2, still active research, still being worked on. Number 3, it definitely computers have a huge advantage in that area already. Jonas continues here. If the answer to any of the above 3 questions individually is yes, and certainly with 3 it already is yes, then what is the limiting factor for why the combination of all 3 cannot be a robot driver that is thousands or even millions of times safer than a human driver? Again, getting to commercial airline levels of safety, not just human levels of safety. Now consider that the robotaxi needs to perform 3 key physical outputs: steering wheel, obviously, accelerator, in other words, pushing the gas pedal, the accelerator pedal, and brakes. That's it. I mean, it's really only 3 output controls. It's the angle of the steering wheel, the amount of pressure on the accelerator, and the amount of pressure on the brakes. It's really simple as compared to Optimus, the humanoid robot that has many, many control outputs and is much more complex. A car is actually a relatively simple thing to drive in terms of the outputs, right? It's steering wheel angle, accelerator pressure, and brake pressure. That is all you need to know to drive a car. Then moving on to more of a conclusion here, we get the full story of the robotaxi will be told over decades, which is very, very true. Autonomous car experts will point to far more advantages a robotaxi may have versus a human driver that can improve over time, including predictive analytics, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, and route planning. Autonomous safety experts will point out the lack of moral equivalency between a traffic fatality caused by a human versus a robot. So I think what he's saying here is that people will treat a robot fatality, if a robotaxi is driving the car, and there was an unfortunate incident just, was it 2 days ago? Early October anyway, in San Francisco, where someone got pinned underneath a cruise vehicle and unfortunately passed away. Doesn't look like it was actually the cruise vehicle's fault. It was a human driver that hit the person initially, and then they rolled underneath the cruise vehicle. So very, very unfortunate. But of course, the headlines are all about how that vehicle was what killed the person, right? That vehicle was obviously not at fault in this. It's something that you can't control. That's just the way the world works. But there's the moral equivalency aspect of that. People will get on the robotaxi, not on the human that initially hit the person and thus caused the accident in the first place. This next couple sentences is really interesting. In many ways, today's robotaxis need to be the toughest and the bravest. They must navigate city streets congested by human drivers following human rules with infrastructure designed for humans. The robotaxi progeny of 2033 or 2043 will likely enjoy many advantages compared to the autonomous car pioneers of 2023. So first of all, interesting to think of ourselves in the modern world as pioneers, right? You can think about like 100 years ago in 2023 and what was the pioneering stuff back then. In 2123, what will they look back on and see us as? It's always interesting to think in the future what people will think about us today, like how old-fashioned all of this stuff will be. But one of the definite things will be the mix of human and autonomous vehicles on the road for the next decade or two. That's the most dangerous time. Once you have all robotaxis on the road, it's going to be way, way safer than robotaxis interacting with humans because humans are very, very unpredictable. So a very good point here that we are the pioneers at this point. We, as humans driving these things, the robots driving it, the researchers trying to figure out how to make this safer and more effective, all of that kind of stuff. We are currently the pioneers. So very cool. I don't know. Gives us that pioneering spirit, I guess, conquer the West. Anyway, continuing on, this is where the bleeding edge of AI/machine learning comes into play. Could the prospect of advanced custom AI supercomputing combined with a neural network trained by a monumental data set where the learnings of one vehicle can improve the performance of all vehicles operating in a fleet at the same time be the missing ingredient for the robotaxi era? Time will tell, but we think there's a shot, and we think Tesla is well positioned within our coverage in this regard. So a few things: the learnings of one vehicle improving the fleet, that already is happening. It doesn't matter what autonomous driving company they are, they're projecting this out to everyone. So as opposed to humans, where every single human has to learn how to drive individually, at least anybody who wants to learn how to drive, with all of the cars, every single car can get a software update and can then be as good as the best driver. Then of course we get to custom AI supercomputing, which would be things like NVIDIA's H100, which is very custom for AI training, and of course Tesla's Dojo. And then the proper neural network architecture, which is still being discovered at this point, and of course the place where Tesla has the biggest lead, which is the monumental data set. Tesla has a data set that nobody else has. They figured out how to curate it, how to get the best data, the most important data out of it, and how to train their vehicles, how to make a data flywheel and utilize the data that's collected by the vehicle fleet to improve everything and get yet more data that they need. So Tesla, as Jonas says, is very well positioned within their coverage. And I don't know who is the competition. I guess Mobileye maybe is the competition, but really nobody else has the kind of size of data that Tesla is collecting, and nobody else can build out a fleet of cars in the millions like Tesla is able to do now. And speaking of building out a fleet of millions of cars and all of that kind of stuff, I'm actually going to do another video related to this one. Originally, I was going to put them together, but this one is so long and my voice has been so wrecked from this weekend that I'm just not going to talk longer today. But tomorrow or the next day, I will put out another video about that. So stay tuned for that for sure. So in the meantime, let's wrap this up. So to the robotaxi community, we say this: we understand that technological progress will not be in a straight line, and the regulatory progress may be even more unpredictable, but we thank you in advance for making our roads safer. And that's certainly a well-deserved congratulations that goes out to every player in the space, because everyone, even if they're just doing ADAS systems and stuff like that, they're making the roads safer than they were before. So thank you to everyone, but a particularly large thank you, of course, to Tesla for really pushing the boundaries here, trying to get to the point where we will have a massive fleet of vehicles that will be able to drive themselves and be safer than a human being at the same time. So a really good note by Adam Jonas and Morgan Stanley. Thank you guys for really thinking about this stuff and thinking about decades, 2033, 2043. All of that is just amazing to see, and I really, really love it. And of course, this gets me really hyped up for the future of autonomous driving and certainly driving FSD beta 11.4.7.2. Too many numbers, by the way. It has been really an incredible experience. I think they're rolling a lot of version 12 into 11.4.7.2, so it feels already like it's starting to drive like I expect version 12 of the vehicle will. So anyway, the next few years are going to be really amazing to witness the major advances that autonomous driving will take, and hopefully regulators will get behind it and approve it relatively quickly, and we will see them in force on the roads in just a few years. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it, and of course consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and of course my ex-subscribers. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel in any way that you can. And of course, if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And finally, a big thanks once again to CuriosityStream for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description and start your journey of discovery today. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.